Good morning or good afternoon to everyone joining us from across Canada. Thank you for taking time to be here with us today for the League's first online Advent retreat. Before I introduce our guest speaker, I will explain briefly how the session will go. If you are new to participating in the League's webinars, all attendees' mics have been put on mute. This is to enable as many people to participate as possible and to eliminate any static or echo from the broadcast. There will be a period where you may be asked for reflection. There will also be time for questions. So to provide your written reflection or ask a question, there is a little question mark on the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. Feel free to click on the question mark to enter in your thoughts and your questions. Our guest presenter today has also provided a handout, which you can also find on the right-hand corner of your screen. So, Father Con O'Mahony grew up in Ireland and in 1982 immigrated to Canada as a newly ordained priest for ministry in the Diocese of Hamilton. He served in parishes in Georgetown, Hamilton, Kitchener, and Waterloo before his appointment to St. Andrew's Parish in Oakville in June 2015. In November 2010, he was appointed Vicar for Education for the Diocese of Hamilton by Bishop Douglas Crosby. Father O'Mahony has taught courses in religious education and faith and culture at St. Michael's College, Brock University, St. Paul's University, and for 25 years with the OECTA Religious Education Formation Program for teachers in many parts of Ontario. He has served on the Canadian Conference of Catholic Bishops' Commission on Religious Education from 1989 to 1992. From 2002 to 2007, he was one of 2 Canadian participants in an Australian-led research and study project on faith formation for Catholic educators with participants from New Zealand, England, Australia, and Canada that concluded with a month-long residency at Edith Cowan University in Perth, Australia, and that was in September 2007. Currently, he co-chairs a similar conversation on adult faith formation with participants from England, Australia, and Canada that is expected to continue until 2024. Father O'Mahony has written on faith and culture, and he was an editorial advisor and regular book reviewer for Celebrate. His 2010 essay on the Parish in a Culture of Change won first place in the feature article category at the U.S. Catholic Press Association Awards ceremony, and later in the year at the Canadian Church Press Awards. He is co-author with Bernadette Gasline, hopefully I said her name right, of Life Has Changed, Not Ended, which was published in Canada in 2005 and has been republished several times since. He served as the bishop's delegate for 10 years on the Board of Governors for St. Jerome's University. In 2019, he received the OCSOA Honorary Membership Award for his contribution to Catholic education in Ontario. He has had a long association with ecumenical and interfaith initiatives that bring people together in dialogue and to respond to community needs. His interest in travel has taken him to many parts of the world, including an overland journey from Tibet and the Himalayas to Kathmandu, Nepal, and down the Mekong River through Laos and Cambodia. In his spare time, Father O'Mahony likes to cook for friends, explore new writing and cinema, and travel. So, welcome. Thank you for being with us here today.
Thank you, Amanda. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon. I don't think I have to say good evening to anybody yet in Canada. It's lovely to spend some time with you this morning or this afternoon, wherever you are, as we continue with the Advent season and also journey toward the beautiful season of Christmas, which in so many parts of our country will be very different this year. I live in Oakville, Ontario, and we're sitting in a very precarious position where we're not even sure if our churches will be open for services at Christmas. We just like many parts of Canada, we just can't seem to be able to get a handle on numbers. So this afternoon or this morning, let's just try and decompress a little bit from all of those cares and concerns, and coming from the experience of COVID and the many different ways that we've experienced it. Let's just take the next 80, 90 minutes to just breathe a little bit, and using some prayers, some readings from our tradition, some reflections from the scriptures. Let us allow ourselves to hear these lovely words, and hopefully at the end of the experience, something will stay with us, and something will linger with us in these last weeks of Advent. When the pandemic experience began, I was fascinated one evening watching the BBC news when Fergal Keane, who is an Irish reporter who works with the BBC, quoted an Irish priest and philosopher named John O'Donoghue. I'm sure many of you have heard his name. His interview on Tapestry on CBC Radio is probably one of the finest interviews about spirituality, modern spirituality, that's ever been recorded on radio. And he did a similar recording for National Public Radio in the United States. But Fergal Keane, as he was talking about the European experience early in the pandemic, in his report, ended his report with this lovely quote from John O'Donoghue's, one of John O'Donoghue's poems from a book called To Bless the Space Between Us, or it was also published in Europe under the title of Benedictus. And I thought that this would be a lovely way for us to start our time together, looking back, because the poem talks about looking back, but it also talks about looking forward. And if you have the handout, the text of all of these pieces that I'm going to quote from are available to you. So John O'Donoghue was unfortunately he died very young, and at the height of his publishing activities. And he has some great wisdom. It's a lot of talk about Celtic spirituality. People are excited by it, and people are somewhat skeptical of it. But he dug into the Celtic tradition of being at one with the world that God has created, and allowing all of God's creation to whisper thoughts, ideas, words, or sometimes just to whisper silence to us, no matter where we find ourselves. If you have had the opportunity of reading any of his work or reading any of his poems, you know that he draws just a simple activity of putting turf in the fire becomes an opportunity for him to reflect on the bounty of God. Long before Pope Francis challenged us and encouraged us to think about the environment and to think about the earth as our mother, who cares for us and protect us, John O'Donoghue was writing about these things. So this is the little quote that Fergal Keane presented on the BBC program, and it went viral within hours of his speaking it. So this is what John O'Donoghue wrote. He said, "This is the time to be slow, It's the time to lie low to the wall until the bitter weather passes. Try as best you can not to let the wire brush of doubt scrape from your heart all sense of yourself and your hesitant light. If you remain generous, time will come good, and you will find your feet again on fresh pastures of promise, where the air will be kind and blushed with beginnings. What I love about that piece is the invitation to be slow. If you remember in the early days of the pandemic experience, at least here in Ontario where I live, I mean, even I got caught up in the panic. I found myself in Costco one day, and I too was loading up on toilet paper and paper towels. And where a normal run to Costco would be average maybe $80 to $100, suddenly I have $250 worth of stuff in my cart. I mean, we were frantic, and because we were so uncertain about what was happening. And then all of a sudden, everything is closed, and we found ourselves having to deal with a lot of silence. And I live in an old neighborhood, and one of the things that I noticed in those first weeks was nobody was walking about, and if we were out and about, there was a tentativeness to our being out and about. And so I think that in this lovely poem, in fact, O'Donoghue captures this uncertainty that we were living with. I don't know about you, but I truly believe that the COVID-19 experience has brought us to a new conversation about what it means to live, but also about what it means to die. Here in my parish, which is we have both an older section at the parish community. We've also got a very young section of the community. We experienced 17 deaths, which was unusual in about a 7-week period. And the first deaths had no connection with COVID at all. But in fact, one in particular of a younger man who was just finished treatment for cancer. He somewhere between the hospital and respite, he developed COVID and died, and having to deal with the fallout of that was quite a traumatic experience, not just for his family, but also for the community, who could not offer any support at the time. I remember only 10 people could come to the funeral home for the service, and that included myself. The staff stepped out so that other family members could participate in the funeral service. Not everybody had an experience of death, but those images coming from Italy, especially the images coming from New York City, they do burn into our minds, and they rest in us. They sit there consciously or unconsciously, and we need to look at them. We need to take the time to ask ourselves, well, how are we doing with all of this? I think one of the things that's also happened over this COVID experience is that our values have been challenged. To wear a mask, not to wear a mask, to break the laws that are put out there for us to observe are not. And I think one of the things that's interesting is that during this period, we're all asked to commit to something beyond ourselves for the good of the other person. The other thing that the COVID experience has done is that it's brought us to use language very differently. Imagine a year ago telling people that 6 months after Christmas, you will be practicing safe distancing. I think most of us would have said you're watching too much Netflix. you're into the science fiction. That's not good for you. And yet here we are. Safe distance is important, and safe distance, we're told, saves lives. Imagine walking out and about, as I do here in Oakville, and seeing people as soon as you walk into a store, covering the lower part of your face. I know I've been to parts of the world where women especially are covered from head to foot, and there is a bit of a Western reaction going, whoa, whoa. And yet here, every one of us, we're all practicing these new things. We're covering ourselves. Our mouth isn't visible. This lower part of our face is not visible. We're talking about bubbles. No, not as in bubbles in the bath. We're talking about being in safe bubbles, creating that safe place. And the hardest one of all, I think, that I hear again from parishioners and people as I'm out and about, the difficulty that they have with not being able to touch another person. I was on call at the hospital just a week ago, and I didn't have a lot of calls, but I had a few calls. And when people are in distress, when people have difficulty, the first thing you want to do is to reach out and to touch somebody. But for what, 8 months, 9 months now, that's something that we back away from. We just simply can't do it. And in the hospital setting, you had to stand back a certain distance, even from the bed or the patient, if the patient was sitting out. But one of the positive things, I think, is that we've been learning to communicate with our eyes. We're finding another way to communicate, and I love it at Mass when I see people reaching their hands out like this, which is actually the ancient shalom in Hebrew. Means, you'll notice if the word is being used, somebody's hands go out immediately to indicate to you, I'm not your enemy, I am your friend. Communicating with our eyes, suddenly we become very, very aware that if we want to show somebody support, if we want to encourage somebody, I notice it at the store especially, how opening your eyes, looking maybe a little more intently at the other person becomes very, very important. And then, of course, we come to the whole thing of sanitizing. I mean, my hands are raw from goop, from all of the different places I've been to over the past we've all had that experience. I think another hard word that we've come to spend a lot of time working on is the word isolation. That's not Christian language. We never isolate somebody, and we certainly, I mean, we would react if there was any thought or suggestion that we isolate somebody, for example, who is well, somebody who has no reason for isolation. And yet here, this word is a word that we probably use several times, I'm in isolation, or my family they're isolating themselves. I have this dream when all of this is over, we're all just going to burst out onto the street wearing t-shirts. I'm in isolation no more, please hug me. But I think that that's got to be a few months down the road yet. I think also in this COVID experience, and maybe this is what John O'Donoghue was referencing when he says, this is the time to be slow, to lie low to the wall until the bitter weather passes. And the bitter weather brought with it a lot of loneliness, a lot of solitude, and a lot of mental health issues. There's a lot of talk about this here in Ontario, and I'm sure it's the same across the country, that people who live alone and people who are not used to living alone have suddenly found that there is another depth to the experience of loneliness and solitude. And while for many, solitude is an important experience, it's interesting when you hear them say, I think I've had enough of it. We're social people, and we need to be able to be in contact, be able to be in relationship with each other. Grief is something else that I believe we need to pay attention to. And more importantly, I think the whole idea of grief postponed. Those 17 funerals that I mentioned that took place with very, very small little groups of people in that initial lockdown in the spring. We've had the opportunity to celebrate most of those funerals with a larger community, family and friends present in the early part of the fall, the late part of the summer, early part of the fall. And one of the things I noticed as people were walking into the church for these celebrations were how family and friends are often almost bent over with grief, carrying the burden of not being able to say goodbye, carrying the burden of not having the time that we so need when a loved one dies, when a loved one passes away. And the other thing I think that we also will have to pay particular attention to in the future is the experience of isolation. Again, that's something which, as Christians, goes against everything that we believe, to isolate. The whole call of the Christian in the Christian community, the call of the disciple in the world, is the call to bring people out of the shadows, to bring people out of their isolation into the heart of the community. And I think all of these things, loneliness, solitude, mental health, grief, isolation, these are the agenda items for us pastorally as we move out of the pandemic experience. I think it's important to put them on a list somewhere and to begin to ask ourselves the question, now, how are we going to pay attention to those things? I think also that one of the things that's happened during this pandemic experience is that it's brought the churches back to the basics. And it raises a very, very important question about our relationship with the church. Many churches have done some incredibly creative things to be able to reach out to their parishioners and to be able to bring the Word of God, to be able to bring the experience of church into people's homes. It's been very, very important work. But over the last several months, one of the things in particular that I'm paying attention to as I'm listening to parishioners, especially those who are reluctant to come back to church for health reasons or for whatever other reason, um, I think as you listen to the longing that's in their hearts and the longing that is in their faith experience, it's also asking the church, I think, to pay attention to what happened to us while we were away. And I think that's what I mean by that. That's what I mean when I say that I think the pandemic experience has brought it's bringing the church back to review what are the basic things that we need to pay attention to. And the most important thing, I think, is that we need to pay attention to listening to each other. I'm Irish, and I certainly have I really don't have anything much to think about or to say about royalty in Britain, but I was very impressed with Meghan Markle and her editorial piece in the New York Times 2 weeks ago when she spoke about the experience of losing her child, the stillbirth, in the month of July. And if you've had the opportunity to read the article itself, of course, that's what the headlines all focused on. But there's a message in her article which I think is a crucial message, which is to ask the simple question, how are you and how are you doing? And I think that's the work of the church as we move beyond the pandemic experience too. You know, and your first reaction when you're asked the question is, "Oh, I'm doing fine." But how are you doing? And I think it's going to be very important work for us to develop our listening skills. I mean, what a great activity for the Catholic Women's League in the wonderful work that you do across the country, to create little stations where you can ask the question and the person that you're asking the question of will know that someone is prepared to listen to what I have to say. And I think that that's part of that renegotiating the renegotiating of our experience of the church. To pay attention to what people are asking us. What are people asking of us? I think there's no doubt that one of the things that will happen as a result of the pandemic experience is that we as priests are going to have to pay particular attention to the way in which we preach, because if priests are honest and if they're following the data of what's happening as we're broadcasting Mass live from our churches or pre-recorded from our churches, it's interesting when you look at the data, the number of times when the homily is going nowhere, and that's been my personal experience, and people just switch off and leave. I think in the midst of the pandemic, Pope Francis has been a beacon of light for us. I think that experience of watching him, if you had the opportunity to experience the evening service that he offered the church in Italy and he offered the world, where you saw that old, almost hobbling Pope walking through an empty St. Peter's Square up to the dais to lead people around the world in prayer is one of the most powerful images of the Pope as pastor and father and brother to the universal church. For me, I remember sitting here watching it, and I had tears streaming down my face because here was a man who understands the suffering that this the city of Rome, the entire country of Italy finds itself in, the entire world finds itself in. And here, as the rain is coming down in St. Peter's Square, here he is offering the best thing that he can offer: his presence, his prayer, his closeness, his intimacy in the way that he is present to us, and his silence. Because in the silence, if you remember the experience, there were these wonderful drawn out moments when thankfully the media people kept quiet, and in the silence it was almost as if he was hearing echoed to him the groaning of humanity who wants someone to hear and to understand what is happening, our fears, our concern, our uncertainty, our feeling of this aloneness. And here, this old man standing here with his head bowed, here this old man hears us and reflects back to us the comfort of being present to us. So in the big picture, what has been happening, I think these are all of the things that have been happening to us. And one of the things I hope that has happened in your experience is that you have experienced moments or glimpses of God's nearness to you and God's presence to you. So thanks to Amanda, who is a marvelous facilitator, we're going to listen to a piece of music. This is a beautiful hymn. I had never heard it before. It comes from the Mennonite tradition. When I lived in Waterloo, one of the great joys of living in the Waterloo region was getting to know the Mennonite community and Mennonite spirituality, which I've come to have an enormous appreciation for. So as you listen to this lovely piece, We Are Not Alone, just allow yourself to think. What has your experience been? What one word would you describe your experience as over the last number of months? What was your low point? And what was it that gave you hope during the experience? So Amanda is going to take over and play this piece.
strong, for God is with us. We will pass on, for God is with us now. We will again.
That is a magnificent piece of music. That is a magnificent piece of music, and I'm just making sure that yes, that is a magnificent piece of music. And if you had the opportunity to hear the first reading at Mass today, you know that the prophet Isaiah echoes what we heard in that lovely piece of music, that God will be gracious to us, and that God hears our cry, and that if we need food, he will provide, and if we need water for our thirst, we will receive water for our thirst. We hear a lot from. I'm going to talk a little bit about the prophet Isaiah just in a few moments, but as someone to accompany us for the Advent season, that's the recurring theme that we hear again. We are not alone. God is with us. We are not alone. God is with us. So maybe that's the little worm that we will leave our time together with this afternoon. Henry Nouwen is one of the great spiritual writers of the 21st century. He had a very interesting connection with some Dutch Canadian families here in Oakville, and is much beloved in this community. And I came across this lovely passage from his one of his lesser known books, which is Gracias, a Latin American journal, just this past week. And as we journey toward the season of Christmas, there's some good wisdom for us here. Henry Nouwen writes, God came to us because he wanted to join us on the road, to listen to our story, and to help us to realize that we are not walking in circles, but moving toward the house of peace and joy. There is the great mystery of Christmas that continues to give us comfort and consolation. We're not alone on our journey. The God of love who gave us life sent us his only Son to be with us at all times and in all places, so that we never have to feel lost in our struggles, but always can trust that he walks with us. Christmas is the renewed invitation not to be afraid, and let him, whose love is greater than our own hearts and minds can comprehend, be our companion. Let that sink in for a moment. this lovely thought, this lovely idea that as that piece of music kept repeating again and again, God walks with us. God is in the journey. God is in the experience of walking with us. I mentioned the prophet Isaiah, and he's a very interesting prophet. He comes out of that experience of exile about 500 years before the birth of Christ, when the Babylonian captivity takes place. The elders of Israel are taken into captivity, and there by the rivers of Babylon, they sit and weep because they've lost everything. And the reason they've lost everything is that they took their eye off of the task that was at hand. And the task that was at hand was to be faithful to the covenant. But their success in the promised land, after Moses had led them to the point where they crossed the Jordan River into the promised land, their success also brings with it arrogance and shiny things that get in the way. And so the people of Israel once again had lost their way, and they find themselves in this captivity in Babylon, which is where the prophet Isaiah emerges. And he is a young prophet when he speaks to his elders, and he has to speak the truth to them. The reason that you find yourself in the mess that you find yourselves in is that you lost your way. You lost sight of the task. You lost sight of the purpose which is at hand. And then he encourages them to listen. The elders much prefer to sit by the rivers of Babylon and weep and sing the old songs of Zion. But the young prophet speaks up and says to them, these are lovely songs. These are wonderful songs for the old land, the old place. But you must get back on your feet, and you must claim again the task which has been set before you, which is to be faithful to the God who has called you to this covenant. And you will hear these songs sung in Jerusalem again in your future, but get back to what it is that is important. And what's important is that you be faithful. What's important is that you give the Lord of the covenant, you give the Lord of the prophet Elijah, who heard the Lord in the sound of who heard the Lord in the sound of the gentle breeze. You must come back into a relationship with Him. And one of the things that this young prophet does, it's actually hinted at in the reading from Mass this morning, and you hear it at its most beautiful point in the reading for the Mass for midnight at Christmas, when that lovely image, that pastoral image of the mountain is read. As we prepare to hear the gospel of the birth of Christ. So the prophet is saying to these exiles by the rivers of Babylon, dream your dreams with the Lord. Don't be afraid of them. Don't dream big, dream large, but make sure that you are dreaming with the Lord. And when you rediscover again in your life who you are and what you have been called to do, then good things will come to you, and good things will happen to you. The bread that you will eat will be the bread for your journey. The water that you will drink, it won't just be water to quench your thirst, but it will be the water that wells up, springs up in you, that gives you life. So all of this, the young prophet Isaiah presents to the elders by the rivers of Babylon, and it takes a while. It takes them a while to come and to understand what this is going to mean in their lives. A few weeks ago, a wonderful educator whom I have the great privilege of knowing was here in the Diocese of Hamilton, and he gave a talk that I had the opportunity to hear, where he was talking about the times that we live in and the challenges that these times bring with them. And he said, I love this piece. I loved it so much that I was able to write it down. He said, "Don't be robbed of your joy. Don't be robbed of your enthusiasm. Don't be robbed of your hope. Don't become pessimistic. Don't become idealistic. Try to be virtuous." I loved it, because it's so easy to go into the place of shadows and darkness. And what he is, I think, saying to all of us in this time, but especially in this Advent time, when we are living with such uncertainty, he's saying, try not to live in the shadows, come into the light. And I love the word that he used, especially the word virtuous. Try to be virtuous. And when I heard it, I thought, wow, this is fantastic. If he's talking about Aristotle's 12 virtues, then what a fantastic agenda for us during the Advent season. If you remember Aristotle's 12 virtues, the first one is the virtue of courage. Have courage. Be brave. The second virtue is the virtue of temperance. Temperance, not in the Irish understanding of it, where you abandon the life of booze. That was a big thing when I was a child. Every child who celebrated the sacrament of confirmation, I mean, we were 12 years of age, for heaven's sake, and we were taking an oath that the demon drink would never touch our lips. And we were all enrolled into this temperance society. That's not what Aristotle is talking about. He's talking about temperance as in moderation. One of the things we discovered in the pandemic experience is that there's a lot of craziness out there, and there's a need for filters and a need for moderation. The third virtue that Aristotle speaks about is the virtue of liberality, not in the sense that we're all going to become flaming liberals, and I don't mean that in the political sense, but liberal in our attitude and liberal in our approach. Rather, liberality, as Aristotle understood it, was that you spend time doing. You spend time engaging in. Giving liberality. It's like that word shalom. When you speak the word, if you're in Israel and you watch, especially in the more conservative Jewish areas of Jerusalem, and you watch how people speak the word, it's this outward shalom. It's this outward movement, and I think that's what liberality means. Magnificence. To be magnificent is to look for beauty. This is one of the big themes Bishop Robert Barron over the last 2 or 3 years is to look for the magnificence, to look for the beauty, to look for, again, this coming out of the shadows, and to find in your life, find in your world, find in your community the magnificence of your community. I'm looking out on a lovely street, and there's a lot of shadow, but the shadow cannot cover the beauty of the trees stripped of all their leaves, and you're not looking at something which is dead, but you're looking at something which is very much alive, because you know that these trees, these beautiful trees, are resting so that we will see their magnificence in another 6 or 7 months. Another virtue is the virtue of magnanimity, generosity, the virtue of ambition. I know as Catholics we often talk about, be careful of ambition, because ambition is going to lead you into sin. But if you're a Jesuit, and if you know anything about the Jesuit community, you know that that's one of the pillars of formation in the Jesuit experience. That is, in the young men who go to the Jesuit novitiate must develop a life plan that illustrates their heroic ambitions for the future. Patience. Aristotle understood the virtue of patience as something which tames our temper and calms our souls, calms our heart. The virtue of friendliness. Friendliness as in the deep, genuine friendliness. The virtue of truthfulness, honesty, being candid. And I love the 10th virtue of Aristotle, which is the virtue of wit. Seeing the humor in the situation, seeing the possibility of humor. Modesty, taming the ego. That's what he means by that. Taming that which is not healthy for us, or that which is not good for us. And the last of his virtues is the virtue of justice, the sense of right, the sense of discerning between right and wrong, the sense of indignation, which is a huge theme of the work of Pope Francis, and especially in his latest encyclical Fratelli Tutti. One of the interesting things that the prophet Isaiah also calls the people of his time to is the attitude of solitude. Solitude, not of going off to be urban hermits. One of the great lessons about the early church that we have today is understanding that so many of those early Christians couldn't wait to go into the desert to live the lives of hermits. And these men and women who went into the desert quickly discovered that as they built walls around themselves, they discovered that that solitude is not about building a wall around yourself to protect yourself, but solitude is actually about being in relationship, being in good relationship. There was a lovely quote in the New York Times recently where the author John Bachman interviewed people who have discovered the art of solitude in the midst of the pandemic. And he had this lovely definition of solitude. He said, it is a means to draw closer to immerse oneself in that or who which is larger than we are, to immerse ourselves in the spirit as it were. That solitude is not about me and my needs and my wants. Solitude is about fortifying ourselves to be in better relationship with each other. So looking at all of these things, looking at the prophet Isaiah, looking at the pandemic times in which we live in, what, as we sit in this little experience of retreat, what is Advent meant to be for us? And what are we called to? It's interesting, every year we talk about Advent as a time to be slow. That Advent is meant to be for us a time when we push the busyness to the side so that we can reflect on our relationship with God, and that we can reflect on our relationship with one another, that we take the time to be slow so that we can prepare for the Lord to enter into our lives. That love, going back to that lovely quote of Henry Nouwen, that that Advent is the time when, as we walk about, we experience the Lord walking by our side. And that Advent is the time for us to reflect on the grace of darkness and light. I think in the Roman Catholic tradition, very often, one of the difficulties that we have is that we see the light as the work of the devil, and we see the darkness as the work of the devil, and we see the light as the work of the Lord. And that is very, very unfortunate, because in the Jewish prayer book especially, the darkness is the place where God must also do what it is that God can only do in the darkness. I know that in our lives, often we feel that we are in a dark place. And in that dark place, sometimes we feel very, very much alone. But if you look at the Psalms, and if you look at some of the prophets in particular, sometimes it is in the darkness that we find the abundance of God's mercy and the abundance of God's presence to us, patience with us. Going back again to that lovely image of Pope Francis that evening in Rome, as he stood alone with his assistant on that dais in a completely empty St. Peter's Square in darkness. And yet, in the darkness, what he was saying to us was, you have nothing to fear. There's a line that I particularly like, which is, say to the darkness, you have no power over me. And so Advent is a time for us to be in the dark, so that we can come to know the grace that comes to us, the grace of the presence of God that comes to us in the darkness. We have no need to fear it, because God is with us. And in that lovely way that we speak about the light, Jesus Christ, the light who comes into the world, the light that comes into the darkness. Advent is also a time for listening. You have no idea how difficult that is for an Irish person, because we love to talk all the time. But there is a discipline in listening. There's the discipline of just that stillness, that silence that becomes very, very important. And Advent is the time to give, and the Advent as a time for us to prepare for the crib and for the cross. I don't know if any of you have ever had the opportunity to see the St. John's Bible, or after this retreat experience, just Google St. John's Bible / image of the birth of Christ. It's one of the most beautiful pages in the St. John's Bible, in Luke's Gospel, where the whole page, almost the entire page, is a beautiful contemporary presentation of the birth of Christ. And what's fascinating in the illustration of the birth of Christ, which is very colorful on the outside but dark in the center, is that you have Mary and Joseph and the crib, but emanating out of the crib is this beautiful gold line that, as your eye goes up the top of the page, you see that in fact it is the cross. It reminds me very much of that gorgeous hymn by Bernadette Gasline, "In the darkness shines the splendor of the Word who took our flesh." And then it goes on to talk about how at the crib stands the shadow of the cross. And Advent is the wonderful opportunity for us to hold these two things in tension with each other. Birth, Jesus Christ, the Son of God, comes to walk among us, and Jesus Christ, the Son of God, who gives his life for us. There's a lovely prayer that comes from Philip Newell. It's from his book, A Celtic Psalter for Morning and Night Prayer. And I think it kind of pulls together some of the ideas that I'm trying to present of the way that we dispose ourselves to experience the Advent experience. And he writes, "In the silence of the morning, I am alive to the new day's light, alert to the earliest stirrings of the wind and the first sounds of the creatures. In the silence of my heart, I hear the yearnings that are in me and the fears, the hopes that rise from within and the doubts that trouble my soul. In the beginnings of this day, O God, before the night's stillness is lost to the day's busyness, open to me the treasures of my inner being, that in the midst of this day's busyness, I may draw on wisdom. Assure me again of my origins in you. Assure me again that my true depths are of you." So another piece of music, and this is a longer piece of music, so it's slightly over 8 minutes, and it's a beautiful setting of the Benedictus from the Mass. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, Hosanna in the highest. It's a contemporary setting of the Mass with a longer introduction, musical introduction, and it's written by Carl Jenkins from his Mass. And as you're listening to it, I would invite you just to take some of these ideas that we've talked about, light, dark, silence, stillness, and watch and listen to how the cello is played. Watch, especially if your eyes need something to do. Look at how the cellist, look at the concentration on his face, but listen to the beautiful music, and then just let it wash over you, let it wash you with the beautiful prayer that is so familiar to us from our Mass. So Amanda, if you can play that, that would be fantastic. It is an astonishing piece of music, isn't it? And I can't tell you how many times I've played that over the last several months, just as a way to to be still, to be calm. And I apologize. I should have warned you that Benedictus was going to come. No, sorry, the Hosanna was going to come, and it was going to be very, very loud. It is what it reminds me very much of is this. It's this whole idea of how do we live in the world? Do we live in the world with the glass half empty, or do we live in the world with the glass half full? And if the Advent season is calling us to do anything, it's calling us to see that the glass is half full. It's not half empty. There, to say to the again, that lovely line, saying to the world, your darkness has no power over me, and it's not going to overwhelm me, or it's not going to pull me down. A final thought. During the summer, I came across a wonderful Canadian writer that I had not read before. His name is Richard Wagamese. Unfortunately, died much too soon. He is an Ojibwe writer who was born here in northeastern Ontario, but died in British Columbia. And in his book, he has a beautiful book of reflections. But in his book, Embers, I think this is a lovely wisdom that he leaves us. He certainly wasn't thinking about pandemic times, but his own experience of the world, I think, led him to write this lovely piece. And after we hear it, maybe we can talk to each other. So if there's a question that you would like to ask, if there's a comment that you would like to make, Amanda is ready to facilitate all of that. So Richard Wagamese writes, I am constantly surrounded by noise, TV, text, the internet, music, meaningless small talk, my thinking. All of it blocks my consciousness, my ability to hear the me that exists beneath the cacophony. I am my consciousness, my awareness of my new circumstances, my presence in every moment. So, I cultivate silence every morning. I sit in it, bask in it, wrap it around myself, and hear me and feel me. Then, wherever the day takes me, the people I meet are the beneficiaries of my having taken that time. They get the real me, not someone shaped and altered by the noise around me. Silence is the stuff of life. The part in that little passage that I particularly like, and it's very challenging, where he says, I sit in it, I bask in it, I wrap around myself. I wrap it around myself and hear and feel me. That's the great challenge. So I've done a lot of talking. I apologize for that. Trying to get an Irishman to keep quiet is a rather difficult thing. So how are you doing? What's happened on your journey during this time of pandemic? Who's been walking beside you? What were your fears? What did you discover? What gave you joy and hope? If you were to tell a friend about your experience, what would you want them to know? So Amanda is going to open it up for about just a little over 10, 12 minutes. Amanda, over to you.
Okay, so we'll just give people a few minutes to
Sure.
type out their thoughts. There have been lots of comments just about how beautiful those pieces of music are, particularly Benedictus. Hauntingly beautiful.
It is gorgeous. It is a beautiful piece of music. You can imagine how just to sit, and I think that that's what Richard Wagames is talking about, is to sit in it, to let your mind. Isn't that the whole point of when you go to the monastery, when you visit the monastery and you hear the monks or the sisters chanting? That's what we do. We sit in it, and we let God do in it what God must do in it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I know several of our members were brought to tears. It's absolutely beautiful. Just reading through some of these things. So there's lots of thank yous, just mentioning how beautiful your presentation has been. Father John commented saying, I regularly walk my dog late at night. Oh, I just lost it. Hold on, sorry. I regularly walk my dog late at night in the middle of nowhere, exactly, so that I can be in darkness. And then one becomes very sensitized to even the smallest manifestation of light.
That's becoming so. If people have the chance to read Fratelli Tutti, which is very much about relationship, it's very much about personal, our relationships with each other. That is such a huge theme that Francis is developing. That in the modern world, the whole person, almost those of us who are adults, it's almost like we need to relearn how to situate ourselves in all that God has created. And I go back again to that image of the Pope that evening in St. Peter's Square. Just that the vast emptiness, which could be so terrifying and shocking, and he brought into it life and victory and hope and presence, which that's a beautiful observation about walking the dog, and you're forced to look and to see.
Absolutely. Sharon mentions that when she had her house, she always shoveled the snow around 11 p.m. just to feel the snow falling in the silence of the night.
Beautiful.
Mm-hmm. You can just see her, right?
Absolutely.
Another person says, I find the prayers mean so much more during the pandemic. I lost the quote, sorry. They're coming in quick, so I lost it here. Okay, sorry. So I find the prayers mean so much more during the pandemic. I love working my way into the day in the dark of early morning and just let quiet envelop me. Thank you for reminding us of the importance of this.
Good, thank you.
Okay. Just gonna make my screen bigger a bit here so I can see. Comments are all coming in quick now. So Holly says the first time that she, sorry, I keep losing these. Okay, so Annabelle says, during the pandemic, I learned to like myself. In the silence of the many hours working in the garden, I found peace and our friendship in God. I found the pandemic to be sort of a blessing in disguise, that it gave me permission to just be alone with me and find out that I am okay. Okay, and so Holly was reflecting, and she said, the first time I have heard about Aristotle's 12 virtues, I look forward to sharing this with all, even non-Christians and workmates. So beautiful. Okay, and so then there's a question. So wanting to know if you can speak to the busyness of Advent when we need to be silent. It seems to be a contradiction.
Isn't that the truth? Yeah, isn't that the truth? It's such a busy time for us, and yet, if you look at I've never done this, but it would be very interesting to take, for example, the prayers of the church. Take the collects. Just even maybe take the collect, just the collects of the Mass, and I will bet that the highlight, that what would come out from a word whirl of the words that are used in those prayers would be that idea of quiet, stillness, calm, waiting, longing. And of course, you can't do those things in the midst of craziness, in the midst of busyness. Maybe this year, I don't know what it's like in other parts of Canada, but certainly just to the east of me here, um, um, there's a busyness because you hear about the lineups, etc., at the big box stores that are still open. But a lot of people are forced this year to experience Advent, and I think the way that the church would want us to experience Advent, or the way that the tradition would want us to experience Advent. It's not about the commercial experience, but it's about putting our house in order. It's that that's a great observation, that this is what Advent is, and yet look at what we've allowed Advent over the last 40, 50 years to become. When I was growing up in Ireland, I lived in rural Ireland, and we had none of this commercialism. And my memory of Advent was about baking, which is an interesting thing that we've all discovered during the Advent experience. And I associate Advent with smells, exotic smells that are different to the normal smell of bacon and cabbage, or something bread baking in the oven, but the smell of spices, special spices that would only come out at Christmas time, for example. And you know, I mean, it would be lovely to go back to that again. And I remember Advent and I remember Christmas also as a time for the senses. All the senses were stimulated. You know, your eye was the simplicity of the decoration, the naturalness of it. I live in a historic part of town, and what I do appreciate about the neighborhood, as I'm looking out this morning, is that it's very simple. A lot of the homes are century-old homes, and everything is decorated very, very simply. There's a simplicity that I think that if we really were to just rediscover the meaning of Advent, I think that's its simplicity.
Okay. Another comment here saying, I love the term cultivate silence from what you said. We tend to go the other way, dwell in noise and activity. The music gave me goosebumps.
Oh, lovely. Yeah, it's about discipline. These are good Catholic words. We should not be afraid of them. And it's learning how learning how to do these things. We had a little meditation group in the parish 3 years ago. We did an Advent retreat, and I brought a couple in who teach meditation. And I think people were really surprised when I brought somebody in to teach us how to breathe and to pray using your breath. And it's once you learn it, it's a wonderful discipline to learn to just to calm during the day.
So it's been a challenging time for all Canadians, and certainly our members who are used to gathering together. And so one of our members says, I have been starting to let despair and discouragement come into my mind. And Advent has come at a good time because it can bring hope into my life. And your comment about Isaiah reminding us to know who we are and what we are called to do is a powerful message.
Very good. If there's a last thought that I'd like to leave you with as an organization that I have an enormous appreciation for, I think pick up on that idea that start preparing now to engage people in conversation, in a conversation at maybe a little bit of a deeper level as we begin to move out of this experience. Consciously ask the question, how are you doing? And as I mentioned, I'm certainly not a royalist, but that article in the New York Times really pulled me up quite a bit. And we talked about it at my parish CWL executive had a meeting last Saturday, and we talked about how are we going to pay attention to that, to how are you doing? How are you doing? And, people may be doing fine, but a lot of people are not doing fine.
It's very true. So Huguette would like to know if you can show an example of breathing and praying at the same time.
Oh, good. All right. So what the lesson that stuck with me was paying attention to your posture. So back straight against I'm in a hard chair, back straight against your chair, and you breathe in, and you hold it for a moment. Breathe in and out. And for example, if you were using the word Maranatha, which means "Come, Lord Jesus," as a meditative prayer, to Maranatha, you can hear it going back out again. Actually, I don't know if you can not see it, but just practice, just practice, just paying attention to taking that, because often I think what the exercise does for me is the exercise helps me to calm down, and then the prayer can come. Out. And I'm probably not the best teacher doing this kind of thing, but there are lots of people in the community. Actually, watch young children meditate, and that will teach you how to do it. They are naturals. Christian meditation has become a very, very popular here in our schools in the province of Ontario. And I love sitting with the kindergartens or the grade 1s or 2s, where they only meditate for about a minute or two, but they've got the posture, they have the breathing down, and the word might be Jesus, and you'll hear Jesus. It's wonderful. It's wonderful.
Well, Huguette thinks you did a great job explaining it. So she had asked the question, and she says she gets it now. So thank you. This is not a question, but rather affirmation and enormous gratitude, says one of our members for this retreat. It was powerful, consoling, and ever so timely. So thank you very much.
Thank you. So maybe we should wrap everything up, which seems to be we're past our time. At the CWL meeting last Saturday, one of our members had a beautiful book of prayers to Mary that I had never. It was published in Dublin, and I had not. I think it was in the 1950s. I had never seen it before, and I thought that this one in particular, actually, this was the prayer that she prayed at the meeting, but I thought it spoke particularly to our time together today. It goes. It's called Mary, Consoler of the Afflicted. Your prayer has been our shield throughout the day, in every hour of trial and of stress. Your name has been our solace and our hope, soothing each sorrow like a soft caress. A time of greater need will soon be here. When comes the sunset and our work is done, when daylight dies and death's dark shadows fall, O Mary, O Mother Mary, lead us to your Son. I love words, and I particularly love the way that this is constructed, and you know, so many words in this prayer can lead to 10, 15, 20 minutes, an hour of wonderful meditation and exploration. And the last prayer that I'd like to leave you with, again, goes because we are approaching the longest night of the year on December the 21st. This lovely prayer comes from the New Zealand Prayer Book and from the Anglican tradition, and I loved it's short. It's short, but it certainly packs a lovely punch. The night is dark. Let our fears of the darkness of the world and our own lives rest in you. The night is quiet. Let the quietness of God's peace enfold us all dear to us and all who have no peace. So in this, in the times in which we live, and with all these stories of numbers going up and death across all of our provinces and territories, what a lovely prayer to end every day with. We have nothing to fear. Goes back to that lovely piece of music at the beginning again, because God is with us. That's the so thank you. It was lovely to have you, all of you, in my home this afternoon and this morning, and God's blessings for the remainder of Advent and for the Christmas season.
Thank you so much for being with us today, Father, for spending your Saturday with us and giving us your perspective on the current pandemic that is affecting our world. Thank you for mentioning how important it is, not just for people to care for one another, but for us to also take care of our own needs, and reminding us it's vital to attend to our mental health and our solitude and grief postponed, like you mentioned. I think that really, that was very poignant. I personally particularly enjoyed when you spoke of Pope Francis in St. Peter's Square. You mentioned his presence and his prayer and his silence, or his understanding. I think that's a reminder to all of us as members that we too can be present and have our prayer and be silent in understanding the needs of others. And thank you for sharing those beautiful pieces of music. As I said earlier, simply hauntingly beautiful, and reminding us of the treasure of silence. So
Thank you.
with that, thank you for everybody who joined us today. Merry Christmas to everyone. We do have a few other webinars coming up. If you'd like to attend, there is the fireside chat with our honorary life members occurring on December 13th. So if you haven't signed up for that, it would be a great one to attend. Okay. Thank you, everybody. God bless.